I think we're ready to begin, David.
I am.
Great. Well, good evening and welcome to the Fortune Society, everyone. And thank you for joining us this evening for tonight's celebration of none other than David Rothenberg, our beloved friend, our leader in so many ways, and the visionary for the Fortune Society. My name is Andre Ward. I am Associate Vice President for the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society. And like many of the 300 staff who work at the Fortune Society, I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I mean, I'm certainly like most of our colleagues and like many of our staff, and not necessarily to be judged by the worst thing that I've ever done in my life, but being a fortunate opportunity to live the best of my life, to live a life of contribution. You know, those of us who have been incarcerated, we tell the almost 8,000 people that the Fortune Society serves that you can be better, that you can do what you will with your life in a way that you can make a positive contribution, and that we and others came before us to set the way for you to be an asset and to live a life that you like. If you'd like to get in contact with me at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, you can email me at award@fortunesociety.org. That's award, like award, and I'm sure many of you have received them, and certainly David has received a ton of them, award@fortunesociety.org. And now, ladies and gentlemen, all of the people who are viewing this birthday celebration of our beloved David Rothenberg, it's my pleasure to introduce you to one of the bright lights of the American theater, a longtime friend of the Fortune Society and most recently seen on Broadway in the musical Tootsie. Please join me, everyone, in welcoming Julie Halston. Julie, take it away.
Thank you, Andre. It's wonderful to be here. Hi, everyone. I am so delighted and honored to say a few words about my friend, David Rothenberg. I think I became aware of David in the 1980s when I was a part of Charles Busch's legendary company, Theater in Limbo, and we were doing shows like Vampire Lesbians of Sodom and Psycho Beach Party and Red Scare on Sunset and The Lady in Question, and David was always so supportive. And in addition, my late husband, Ralph Howard, worked a lot with David because he used to interview a lot of David's off-Broadway and Broadway star clients. And they also became very friendly. But I am also an inveterate and relentless name dropper. So when I heard that David was doing a show called Namedropping at the Mint Theater, I just rushed down to see it. I couldn't wait. In fact, I think I saw it twice because I loved it so much. And the stories are incredible, and you will hear them tonight. But in addition, anyone who knows David, and many, many, many of you know David, knows that he founded the Fortune Society, which is the incredible organization that supports successful re-entry of the incarcerated back into society and helps strengthen themselves and the community at large. And that's what we're doing here tonight. Supported by his friend and the wonderful director and actress, the brilliant Marcia Jean Kurtz, who directed this piece, whose sterling resume includes working with such luminaries as Al Pacino, I guess you've heard of him, Sidney Lumet, Barry Jenkins, just to name a few. Namedropping became a critically acclaimed show and a wonderful success. It is really my pleasure and my honor to support the Fortune Society tonight and to introduce you to the wonderful, wonderful friend of mine and great guy that he is, David Rothenberg.
Yeah. Julie, thank you very much. Am I on the screen now? Yeah. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. 87 years ago today, on August 19th, 1933, Leonora Regina Rothenberg's water broke. And as a result of that, we're here tonight. That's what the gathering is for me to present Namedropping. My greatest challenge this evening will be to stay awake. That's what happens when you're 87 years of age. And the other is to navigate the world of Zoom. The technical mishigas of Zoom has held me hostage for the last 2 weeks. And I thought that the filming of the chariot scene in Ben-Hur might have been easier to deal with than what I have to deal with the last 2 weeks with, what's the name of the show? Name dropping. Fortunately, I've been surrounded by wonderful people. Julie Halston, Marcia Jean Kurtz, the Fortune team, Jamie Maleska, Stephanie Geyer, John Runowitz, Simon Horwath, Mario Irizarry, who have been very supportive and encouraging, but trying to get me to understand. They wanted to make sure that an 87-year-old looked good. So it was all about lighting, first with the lighting. So they got me this thing. Before they found it, I looked like I was 87 years old. Now I look like I'm 87 with a glare on my face. Then there was concern about this. Can you see this? You know, as you get older, there's this gel. And if I do this, I thought I could do this for 90 minutes. And then I thought, well, I would call Nancy Pelosi and get that ascot that she wears, but she's very busy trying to save the post office, so I couldn't get through to her. And then there's liver spots. You know, once you get to a certain age, they're there. And I finally said to everybody, listen, let's face it. I'm 87. Brad Pitt's not going to show up. Look, it's me. I'm the poster boy for senescence. And I'm here to do a theater piece, celebrating my antiquity and the wonderful organization of which I've been a part of for 52 years, the Fortune Society, to continue the magic that happens at Fortune. The theater is part of who I am, and so is the Fortune Society, which literally started on the stage of a theater. Now, the next question I ask, am I in the big picture? I can't tell. I have everybody I have no idea how this, I have to press something. What do I do? Well, there's something. I'm a victim. I'm being held hostage. Anyway, this conceit that I call name dropping started 17 years ago when I was a juvenile of 70. At the castle, the castle's the Fortune Society's incredible residence. It's a model residence for men and women who have come out of prison and have been homeless. People come from all over the world to see it. And the residents in its early years wanted to do a Halloween party for the neighbor children. And there was nothing in the budget for it. So I said, if I could do an event, create something that, and a friend of mine said, you've been boring us with those stories about the stars you've known for years. Why don't you put them all together, announce it on your radio program on WBAI, charge them a few shekels, and then that money can be used. And so that was the plan. And a couple of days later, I was at the theater and I ran into my old friend, Marcia Jean Kurtz, and she asked what I was up to, and I told her about this, and she said, well, who's your director? And I said, director, I'm just going to be telling some stories. And she said, you need a director. And she's been telling me what to do for 17 years, and I follow obediently. So we did it at the castle. I announced it on BAI, and 100 people came, and we got money for the castle. And it was so successful that we did it again, and more people came. And then my friend Jonathan Bank, who runs the Mint Theater, asked if I would do it for a series of Monday nights, which I did. And then the New York Times reviewed it, and the New Yorker, and eventually later Howard Kissel at the Daily News, and they were all good reviews. And suddenly you couldn't kill it with a stick. We were doing it everywhere for almost a decade. It started to slow down. The pandemic hit, and I ran into Marcia, and she pointed at her laptop and said, Zoom it, meaning do name dropping on Zoom, and thus here. as I told you, that at the Fortune Society literally began on the stage of the theater. I produced a very powerful prison drama in 1967 called Fortune in Men's Eyes by John Herbert. And we decided after the Tuesday night performances to have a talk back. And on that first night, I keep seeing lighting. I'm moving about because I see lighting changes on Zoom. On that first night, a man in the audience challenged the authenticity of the play, the drama about that took place in a prison cell. And a man from the back of the house stood up and said, well, not if my 20 years in joints like this counts for anything. You people couldn't watch what we do to each other and what's done to us. And I invited him to come up on the stage, Pat McGarry, and he mesmerized the audience for an hour. We went out for coffee afterwards. And I said, we have to keep doing this, Pat. People don't know. I don't know. This is a story that's unknown. He came back the following week with a friend named Clarence Cooper, and that started a series of Tuesday night talkbacks. Being a good press rep, I called Cy Peck at the New York Times and told them the story. A reporter came down, and a few days later, the headline said, the drama continues after the curtain falls. And the following Tuesday night, during the talkback, at least a dozen men introduced themselves as having done time. And they started coming back week after week. And I learned several things talking with them at the theater and afterwards over coffee, is that most of them were able to stay out of prison because they were in a program that dealt with drinking. They were in AA, and they had a place to go to that dealt with their demons, but they hadn't resolved their rage about their prison experience. And it was the 60s and everybody was on the move. Every marginalized group was asking for in, but here was a group of people that couldn't. They couldn't talk about their lives because they lied to get jobs, they lied to get housing. One man even told me that his grandmother thought he was in North Carolina working in a farm for 5 years because you were excluded from society if you had a record. People started calling me from the audience saying, could you come to our church or our school? And I was suddenly on the circuit with a group of men, and I say men because it was about a year before women started coming forward. And I was on the circuit, and one night at the theater, I said, we have the nucleus for an organization. We could educate the public through your stories, through your lives. And 16 people gave me $2, and we opened a bank account at Chemical for $32. And I like to say we outlasted Chemical. They closed. We're still here 52 years later. And we called it Fortune Society, taking it from the play's title, Fortune in Men's Eyes, which, if there's a quiz at the end of this, it's a sonnet by Shakespeare, and very telling. It begins, one in disgrace, with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state. And that's our origin. We're from Shakespeare at the Fortune Society. And so the Fortune Society began, and in March of '68, I arranged for 4 men who agreed to go on a television show. And this was a first, because the only time people who had done time were seen on television is when they had a paper bag over their head or they were in the perp walk. And 4 of our guys went on David Susskind on a Sunday night in March of '68. And at the end of the program, he said, these men are all part of a new organization, the Fortune Society, 1545 Broadway, contact David Rothenberg. Now, my little theater office was on 46th Street and Broadway. You had to go behind the box office of the Victoria Theater. And the next morning when I arrived, the stairwell from the 6th floor to the 1st floor was filled all the way down with men. It looked like a prison break from Sing Sing. And I'm sitting there in my little theater office not knowing what to do, because what they were looking for is exactly what men and women coming to Fortune are looking for today. Jobs, housing, somebody who might understand what they're feeling. 2 of the guys that came that day, Kenny Jackson and Melvin Rivers, understood the possibilities and the potential, and they stuck around. And the 3 of us decided, this is what we want to do. And we worked out, and my theater office was the headquarters. I was still working in the theater. But eventually I had to make choices because fortune was growing in leaps and bounds. And I just stopped taking new shows. First 3 years, the shows I was working on was paying for the rent and the phones for the Fortune Society. But that all changed. And the people coming to us defined the programs. Their needs described what we had to have. Counseling, employment services, housing, physical and mental health support, all of that. And as we grew, it grew in leaps and bounds. I stayed at Fortune for nearly 20 years. And when I left, I turned the reins over to people who were Joanne Page, and then she was joined by Stanley Richards, and they took it beyond my wildest dreams with their tenacity, their vision, their passion about the work. And in retirement, I became a full-time volunteer because I wanted to be around all of this. And so Fortune grew. And one of the things that people started to notice that is in the tutoring programs, in the classrooms, people were writing poems and they were telling stories. And then they were reading them to us. And they were getting acclamation and applause for creating. And then John Runowitz started doing music classes, and the public theater came to us and wanted to have an acting class. A man named Guy Woodard came out of prison and showed us his extraordinary paintings. He had to do them with ballpoint because the prison wouldn't allow him to use paint. His paintings are now in galleries and he's had major exhibits. And he started art classes. People who had only gotten attention in their life through negative behavior were suddenly getting acclamation and approval and applause for the ability to create. That was a very dramatic difference, that need for self-expression. And some of the participants in this have been part of a beautiful montage, a brief montage, which shows us. Stephanie, if we can show that now, people can get a glimpse of what something that started in the theater became a part of social activism, and how the ability to create and share those feelings can be so exciting.
Left. Take me. Oh, baby. Hey. Hey. Take me higher. Are all that's left of loving you. Ooh. Are all that's left of loving you.
Fortune Society offered me a variety of opportunities, and the tools they threw me have guided me to be a better man than I ever envisioned I could be. Help me see who I'm meant to be rather than who I gotta be. They building people, not prisons. What they unlocked in me was so electrifying, it sort of came as a shock to me. Cause I was headed down the path of destruction. Not to the people, I'm so different from my last introduction. My drive is at its best, I'm no longer lost in the matrix. On the road to success with a full tank and a destination, a place that were forsaken, to heights that were hidden. See, fortune was my optician, they enlightened my vision. Couldn't see the bigger picture, my sights were stuck on the foolishness. Anger was my drug, had to learn how to stop abusing it. Patience, what I'm cruising with, done with the fast course. And it's plain to see I'm going places, minus the passport.
You want my heartache and pain I see. I can't let it get the best of me. Through all this misfortune, I'm still chasing my fortune. They say it's no love out here in these streets. I see a brand new life for me. Through all this misfortune, I'm so thankful for fortune.
A lot of people miss shots on them same courts where the greats played. I was the man that made mistakes, now I'm the man mistakes made. I'm warming up to go higher, hot air ballooning it. Had I not learned from my ludicrous ways, I'd be a lunatic. I done sat in the room with this empty feeling of losing it. Dark days in the cell, the thought of change made it luminous. We wide awoke to our futures, can't let the past sleep us. It's time to show them the vision, we could be math teachers. I still envision them shootouts ever so vividly. The night that bullet pierced through my skin, that could have been it for me. Looked death in his eyes and saw how much I wanna live. When I started valuing time, I ain't have no more to give. No more making temporary things my mission at hand. Separate what's written in stone from what's written in sand. I refuse to let my story end where he was a good kid. Rather say change the world with a kid from the hood did.
All the heartache and pain I've seen, I can't let it get the best of me. Through all this misfortune, I'm still chasing my fortune. There's no love out here in these streets. I see a brand new life for me. Through all this misfortune, I'm so thankful for fortune.
How proud I am to be part of an organization which has created a path for people to travel to find a better life. People often ask me, how do you reduce crime? How do you fight crime? One person at a time. That's how you do it. One person at a time. You create an environment and a culture that permits people to consider a future that is a challenge to their past. My stories tonight are about my years in the theater that paved the way for the creation of the Fortune Society. The two worlds I've lived in blend seamlessly for me. So I present this program tonight. What's the name of it again? Name dropping. For all the theater artists who have enriched my life, and for the men and women who have entered the doors of the Fortune Society and have dared to put their past behind them, replacing it with hope and hugs. And now, that's my intro to Name Dropping, which I'm considering tonight is a warm-up act for Barack Obama, who's giving a speech much later tonight. About 60 years, I was standing in the back of the Ziegfeld Theater. The show was Chevalier at the Ziegfeld. Maurice Chevalier, the international star of film and music and an accused collaborator. He also, if you're not sure who he is, because time goes by, in the movie Gigi, he sang that song that still makes me uncomfortable, Thank Heaven for Little Girls, most lascivious song. So he came out each night and he'd say, good evening, I am Maurice Chevalier and I am 75 years old. And the audience stood and cheered. And I'm standing in the back with Alexander Cohen, the producer, and I said, why does he keep doing this? And Alex said, who knows? And here I am, 12 years older than Chevalier was then. And you might well ask, why does she keep doing this? And that's why they have chat on Zoom, where everybody's Frank Rich. Everybody has an opinion. I can hardly wait. Anyway, name dropping is a tradition in the American theater. In fact, some people consider it an epidemic. And the theater is an arena I have been in and around for over 60 years. Celebrity worshiping is part of the fabric of American life. People wrapping themselves around people who are famous. But what does Webster say about name dropping? And I have located it. Name dropping is a noun the practice of seeking to impress others by studied but apparently casual mention of prominent persons. And I'll show you how it's done. Curiously, some of the most famous people I know or have worked with are chronic name droppers, as if they don't trust their own celebrity, and they drop names as if it improves their own celebrity status. The New Yorker humorist and great writer S.J. Perlman, those of us who know him called him Sid. Now see, now that's how you name drop. You do it, you just drop it in. Who called S.J. Perlman Sid? I did, because he really was a friend of mine. S.J. Perlman in his play The Beauty Part said, "In the aristocracy of success, there are no strangers." I had a friend, he worked in the theater, good guy, name is Bill, chronic name dropper, practically a religion with him. You'd say, "Hi, Bill, how are you? Do you know what time it is? Oh, J-Lo gave me this watch and it's not working very well today." So we would roll our eyes and there he goes again. But I came to realize that Bill was nothing more than an exaggeration of most of us, myself included, and that I have reached the point in my life that working with and having known famous people, I can admire them, I can respect them, I can applaud them, but I don't have to worship them because after all, fame is fleeting. Have you ever watched Mike Pence do a press conference? He vanishes before he's finished speaking. Fame is fleeting. So that is the philosophy and the politics of name dropping. Let's get to the dirt. The first famous person I ever saw, I was 8 years old. My father took me to the Polo Grounds to a giant football game, and I spotted George Raft, contract player with Warner Brothers, always the bad guy. My father said, "Davey, go get his autograph." Now, getting the autograph is the proletariat equivalent of getting the autograph. No theater person would ever ask another star for an autograph. That would imply you're not a colleague. But the great unwashed, us from New Jersey, Staten Island, places like that, if you got the autograph, then you could go back home and prove that you were in the proximity of someone who was more important than everybody else in New Jersey. And I went down and I asked George Raft for his autograph, the great gangster of Warner Brothers movies, and he said, "Beat it, kid." And I said, "You gangsters are all alike." But that didn't stop me from getting autographs. By the time I was in the 7th grade, my friend Arnie Grossman and I, we were the only two in the junior high school who were Giant fans. Everybody else was a Dodger fan or a Yankee fan. Arnie and I would go to the Giant games and we would get the autographs of the players. We'd be out behind the Polo Grounds by the subway and we would get the autographs before and after the games. We got the Giant players within 2 weeks. So then the challenge was to get the autograph of the visiting players. So I'm at the subway at 155th Street behind the Polo Grounds, and there's Walker Cooper, the big catcher for the Cardinals, later became a Giant. I went up to him, this big, I'm knee high to him. "Mr. Cooper, can I have your autograph?" He said, "Gid." I was not yet acquainted with the language of redneck, so I had to repeat the question. "Mr. Cooper, can I have your autograph?" I said, "Get, you don't get, I kick you down the subway steps." Well, I understood that, and I was in the process of getting, when suddenly, coming up the steps, 2 at a time, was Stan Musial, arguably the best left-handed hitter in the history of the National League, this side of Barry Bonds. "Mr. Musial, can I have your autograph?" "Sure, kid, but I'm running a little late. Walk me to the clubhouse." We're walking to the clubhouse. He writes to David, Stan Musial. He says, "You're going to be in the ballpark, kid." I said, "Yeah." "Where are you sitting?" "In the bleachers." "Call me when I come out." Stan Musial wants me to call him. Arnie and I get to the bleachers. First row of the bleachers at the Polo Grounds. It goes like that. It's called stadium seating. About 60 years later, the movies and the theaters realized that people in the 10th row would also like to see the action on the stage, and they recreated stadium seating, which they had it at the ballparks back in the 50s. So we're there, and out comes, I just lost myself on this Zoom thing. out comes Stan Musial. And can you all see me? I touched something. Oh, now I'm back. I vanished. Out comes Stan Musial. He comes over to me. I can't touch anything on this machine, can I? I think it's anti-Semitic. I touch it and it makes a statement. So don't touch it, don't touch. So Stan Musial comes out, comes over. I yell, Mr. Musial, he comes out. We have an in-depth conversation which lasts at least 60 seconds. At which point I share with him that I've always been a Giant fan, but that I will always root for Stan Musial. At which point he tousled my hair, which was much more ample in those days than it is now. I didn't realize the significance of that. But when I got to school on Monday morning, Arnie, my friend Arnie, who later became a very successful public relations man in politics in Denver, he had represented Congresswoman Pat Schroeder and Governor Gary Lamb. He did some early work because everyone in the 7th grade on Monday morning knew that Stan Musial had tousled my hair. But I didn't know the impact of that till about 2 weeks later. I'm walking down the hall of Teaneck Junior High School. Coming at me is Joe Kuttner, the star of the 9th grade basketball team and easily the most important single student in the entire junior high school, who had never acknowledged my existence at all. And as he comes up to me, he says, I see your boy Stan got a home run last night. And that's a little bit of information that a 7th grader can tuck in their back of their head and pull out 30 years later when they're working in the theater. Now, I don't want you to be under the impression that when you work with people that you're in their orbit forever. Doesn't work that way. I'll tell you 2 stories. One, in the very early 60s, I was a young pup working in the theater. I got a job for the summer at the Lakewood Summer Theater in Skowhegan, Maine. What a great summer that was. They gave me my own cottage on the lake. I got 3 meals a day and $75 a week. I was in heaven. Some of the biggest stars of the time came up there. Howard Keel, who had been in all the MGM musicals. A wonderful man named Dana Andrews from Laura. Shirley Booth. She had just won an Academy Award. They didn't know her yet because she hadn't been in Hazel yet. Eve Arden from Armbruster Brooks. And at the end of the summer, Academy Award winning actress Joan Fontaine. She had won an Oscar for Suspicion. The year before, she had been Olivier's leading lady in Rebecca, in the Oscar-winning Rebecca, Hitchcock's movie. By the 60s, you know, over 40 and a little too old for Hollywood standards back in those days, but a big deal up in Maine in 1960. I had her running around Maine. She did radio interviews, television interviews. I even had her at the state fair where she put the wreath over the winning horse and what we called the Joan Fontaine handicap. She and I were together. We had breakfast together, dinner together. We were all over the place, joined at the hip. 2 weeks later, I'm back in the city at an event, and there she is, La Fontaine, my friend from 2 weeks ago up in Skowhegan. I walk over, Miss Fontaine. Not a clue, not a hint. I mumble something about Skowhegan. She condescendingly dismisses me. I walk over to the corner and I'm sitting there. This old timer says, what's the matter, kid? I tell him the story. He said, let me tell you something. Stars like that, they go from movie set to movie set, from theater to theater, from television show to television show. They're surrounded by makeup men, costume designers, stage managers, directors, producers, and press agents. You're all there for one reason, make her look good. I said, I guess so. He said, you dined with her a lot, right? I said, yeah. Describe the chair she was sitting on. I was the chair. And that's what I meant to her. There's a sidebar to this story, though. Years later, when the Fortune Society began, People magazine did a story on me, theater guy working with formerly incarcerated men. and they wanted pictures of me with famous people besides the pictures of me with folks from Fortune. So one of the pictures that they chose to run was this, me with Joan Fontaine. That's me. She's the one on your left, on the other one. I had more hair then. Look at me there. I was hot. I was a hottie. I never knew it. Anyway, in 1985, I ran for city council. And my campaign manager, David Fleischer, decided that a blow-up of the People magazine should be in the window at my storefront down in the village. And one day I come by and there's this little epicene man with 2 poodles, and he says, "Are you Mr. Rothenberg?" I said, "I plead guilty." He said, "Does Miss Fontaine know that you're using her picture in your campaign literature?" I said, "Well, it's not exactly in my campaign literature. It's a blow up of a magazine article that was run many years ago, and she happens to be in it." He says, "I happen to be a dear friend of Miss Fontaine's, and I'm going to report this to her." And as he pranced away, I said, "Chances are she won't remember me, and she might not remember you either." That's my Joan Fontaine story. The other come-up-in story is I worked twice with Tennessee Williams, or certainly one of the great American playwrights. Streetcar Named Desire, Glass Menagerie, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. First time I worked with him, I was the 3rd assistant press person on Night of the Iguana, starring Betty Davis, Margaret Leighton. And even though I was an assistant to an assistant to an assistant, with a hit show, you have a lot of opportunities to meet people. And I covered many interviews with Tennessee Williams, and there were always these parties that were given for hit shows. And I was often assigned to pick up Tennessee, drop Tennessee off. And so I was in his company 60, 70 times. And it was very agreeable. Lovely man, little balmy, very nice. About 7 years later, I had my own office, and I was the senior press person on Tennessee Williams' Slapstick Tragedy, starring Margaret Leighton, the wonderful late Kate Reed, who I loved so much. Zoe Caldwell made her debut in that, and won her first of about 83 Tony Awards. But Tennessee was the star of his plays in those days. And so I was with Tennessee constantly. 6 months before we went into rehearsal, there were magazine and television shows that had long lead times. So I was in his company frequently. And there were interviews that had to be done, and there were casting calls, and there were production meetings, and we were part of a team. So the show has its first preview, and on a Monday morning, I called Mr. Williams up and I said, I wanted to remind him that I would be at his house at 1 o'clock that afternoon for an interview. And he said, "I'm looking forward to it, Mr. Rothenberg." From Mississippi, don't you know? So I said, "You know, Mr. Williams, on Saturday night, I saw you. I was down at that 8th Street movie theater, that Revival House. Back in those days, before TCM and AMC, if you wanted to see an old movie, you went to Fifth Avenue or the Beverly, and that's how you saw old pictures." And Mr. Williams said, "Oh, want those marvelous movies?" And I said, "Yes, Mr. Williams, I had never seen Dinner at 8 or Grand Hotel before." And he said, "Oh, what did you like, Mr. Rothenberg?" I said, "Well, seeing Marie Dressler. I had always heard of her." And "Oh," he said, "Marie Dressler, wasn't she divine? I would have loved to have written a play for Marie Dressler." And I said, "Well," and he said, "But Mr. Rothenberg, if you saw me Saturday night, why didn't you come over and say hello?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Williams, it was late and you were with people. I didn't want to presume or intrude." And, "Well, that was very thoughtful of you." And I said, "And I knew I would be seeing you today, and I will be up at 1 o'clock. And he said, "Well, I'm looking forward to it, Mr. Rothenberg. Can I ask you one question?" I said, "Surely, Mr. Williams." He said, I know you, but from where?" Well, Kander and Webb had not yet written Mr. Cellophane Man, but I was ready to write sing a couple of bars of it. Doesn't that make you feel good? So that's the theater. don't meet somebody and think you're in their orbit forever. And then there are the stars that you work with. The interesting thing, you could be working and the phone rings and you are being asked to be involved in a show with an icon, and your life changes dramatically as a result. And what happens with these stars that you work with is that the naysayers come out of the woodwork. You're working with her? Oh, a nightmare. My cousin's sister's brother-in-law did her hair. Horrible. Oh. So when Night of the Iguana was coming on, I knew I wasn't going to be working with Betty Davis. My boss, Ben Washer, had a long relationship with her. But when I was a kid, my idea of a movie star, of an actress, was Betty Davis, and of an actor was Spencer Tracy. Those were my, if there was a Tracy or a Betty Davis movie, I was there as a kid. So I'm going to be working on a show that Betty Davis is in, even though I'm not going to have much to do with her. I want to meet her. So I wrote these little couplets and I left them on Ben's desk. I can only remember one. I wrote, will it be, I'll never see, my favorite actress, Betty D. Well, he compiled all these couplets when gave it to her when the show was in Chicago. And she said, Ben, bring the boy around. So the first Wednesday matinee, Ben brings me in. There she is, Betty Davis. It looked like Margot Channing in All About Eve. She had the terry cloth robe on, the cold cream on the face, something on her, and she was smoking a cigarette like it was Betty Davis. She sits me down. Within 30 seconds, she had me laughing. Within 30 seconds, I had her laughing. Then we were talking about the theater, and then about the movies, and then about living in New York as compared to Hollywood. And then we started talking politics. It was the Kennedy years, and we found that we shared a passion, and we were going at it. And both my boss, Ben, standing at the door, twiddling his thumbs, and Betty looks up and says, Ben, you're free. The boy can come with me. And I was assigned to cover Betty Davis's interviews during the run of Night of the Iguana, much to Ben's relief that he didn't have to schlep. And I was thrilled that I was going to be Betty's picking her up, dropping her off, being with her. But I remember one guy said to me, Betty Davis, she gets a hold of a kid like you, she's going to chew you up and spit you out like bad meat. Well, that sounded like a treat. And I had, we had a great first meeting, but I was I had some trepidation. And the first time I was with her, I took her to WOR, to the Marcia Dean show. And back in those days, that was a big deal. That was like doing the Today Show or being on a blog today. And the Marcia Dean show, it was big stuff. So we arrive a little early because Martha wanted to have a little bit of a pre-interview with Betty. First thing Betty does is take out a cigarette, which you could do in those days, pulls out a kitchen mat, flashes it across the table like a flamethrower. I got hysterical. She was always playing Betty Davis in public. She was doing Betty Davis, and I was getting it, and she got that I got it, if that makes sense. She enjoyed my reaction to her. She gave me a look when I got hysterical. So Martha says, Miss Davis, when I was in Hollywood last year, and I was at different studios, and I wanted to interview you, and the studio wouldn't let me. But they did agree for me to interview your husband, Gary Merrill. Well, Betty and Gary had broken up by the time this was all taking place. And Martha said, and what is Mr. Merrill doing now? And Betty said, drinking. And I fell on the floor laughing. And Betty said to me, oh dear, you better wait in the sponsors booth. You can't handle this. So I waited in the sponsors booth. She made me laugh. She was so funny. So after the interview, we get on the elevator. She's buried up to here in mink. 3 businessmen get on. She has a new audience. She turns to me, David, always let a star make their own decisions. She was alluding to the fact that the studio told her she couldn't have an interview. She always had fights with the studio. She said, let a star make her own decisions. The 3 businessmen are looking at this little kid. What is he doing to her? So we get into the car and she says to me, here's the rules. You come to me. If they don't insult my intelligence, it works around my schedule, and if it sells tickets, I'll do it. So that's what the plan was. And for about 3 or 4 weeks, that's what we were doing. And one day she said to me, don't bother me with the details, David, you're in charge. And what I learned from Betty Davis is that she's the one that's out there. She's the one that's up front. She wants to make sure that the people she's working with, they're professionals and colleagues. And she had reached the point where she told me that she trusted my judgment and my professional skills. And I was thrilled by that. We had a wonderful relationship. When she left the show, she gave me an autographed picture that said, to David, my poet, Betty, which I've lost. A beautiful gift and a thank you letter. And I treasure that forever. And, you know, I hear people, you know, in the business, in the theater and the film, everybody has stories. Whenever I hear a Betty Davis, she's a nightmare story, the first thing I say is, have you worked with her? Did you know her? I found her wonderful. She was replaced by Shelley Winters in the show. You know the difference from there. So, a little bit of name dropping. There were a couple of other women that I was warned about. Greg Dawson, years later, I was representing stars coming into the ballroom, and he said, the first was Eartha Kitt. Now, I knew Eartha had had a very tough time with the press. In the late 60s, she performed in the White House during the Vietnam War and challenged the Johnsons about the war. And that was national headlines. People old enough, there may be a few around, may recall that. And she didn't work in this country for about 10 years. She was blackballed. She worked in Europe. So when I met her, it was years later, it was in the 80s, she was a little hesitant about the press, but she was a nice and very smart. But my favorite experience with her, and you'll understand why, she did an interview at NPR. For some reason, we were over on 2nd Avenue somewhere, walking down 2nd Avenue. Every third person recognized her. She had one of those looks, but they all went, ah. I had known her as a nightclub star. I had not realized that she was Catwoman and Batman, and that's where everybody, and they all growled at her walking down the street. She said to me, want to get a bite to eat? And I said, oh, Eartha, I'd love to, but my lunch hour, I go to the Y. I have to have that hour. She said, I have my tugs. Do you think they'd let me come as a guest? I said, are you kidding? They'll fall on their face if you came. So we went to the Y. I signed her in as my guest. I went upstairs to the basketball court where I played, and the track, what at the 23rd Street Y was over the basketball court. So when I got upstairs, all the guys, most of whom hardly knew my name, even though I'd been playing there for 5 years, said, Eartha Kitt's up there, Eartha Kitt's up there. And I said, I know. And Eartha yells, hi, David, hi, David. It was like Joe Cutner walking down the hall at Teaneck Junior High School. Suddenly, I was somebody in the midst of all these people. I didn't even have to drop a name. I got a wave drop from Eartha Kitt. The other person that came to the ballroom and I was told was difficult was Peggy Lee, one of the most glamorous and talented women in the history of American music. So I arrived at the ballroom. She was having a rehearsal. We were going to meet, and she was on stage doing a rehearsal, showing the lighting guy how to do a pinpoint spot on her thumb as she snapped her fingers to open the show with Fever. And I said, boy, those old timers, she knew the voltage, the wattage on the light bulb, where it should be. I saw that with Davis too. They knew all those, they survived because they knew every aspect of the business. And I had a very successful 6 weeks with Peggy Lee. I thought so. And at the end of the 6 weeks, she said to me, whenever I come back to New York, would you represent me? Well, Peggy Lee? Yeah, okay. And for the next 15 years, she was always Miss Lee. We were always together, and I loved being with her. But there's a story I share because it was so special. One night, I get a phone call, midnight. a voice says, Peggy Lee's calling David Rothenberg. And I said, oh God, these musicians, they're up all night. They don't know that some of us sleep. I get on the phone. Yes, Miss Lee. She said, hi, David. In that wonderful voice. I said, yes, Miss Lee. And she said, when I come in next time, I'd love to do some Frank Lesser songs. And I thought, that's why she wakes me up in the middle of the night. Dad said she's going to do some Frank Lesser songs. And I said, and she said, well, I don't know how to get the sheet music. And I said, well, that's easy. I'll call the Frank office. Joe Sullivan's there. Well, you give me the list of songs and we'll get it. Oh, thank you, David. I said, you know, Miss Lee, I don't think you've ever recorded or I've never heard you sing my favorite Frank Lesser song. What is that? Deanna Durbin introduced it in a movie. It's called Spring Will Be a Little Late This Year. And Peggy Lee said to me, oh, this spring will be, I'll spare you my voice. But she sang the whole song to me. I wanted to put her on hold and call everybody I know and say, get up, Peggy Lee is singing to me. The next day, my mother called me and said, what'd you do last night? I said, I was in bed with Peggy Lee and she sang to me all night. It was wonderful. I was crazy about her. Big stars. And then there was Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor. I have a picture of me with Elizabeth Taylor, an 18-year-old. The Fortune Society came and said, oh, what a pretty woman. Who was she? And I said, Elizabeth Taylor. Oh, she has the perfume. Yeah, that's her. Elizabeth Taylor with the perfume. Elizabeth wasn't difficult. It was the ambiance, the scene. Let me give you some show business history if you're not old enough to remember this. 1962, Elizabeth was given $1 million to star in Cleopatra. First woman ever to get $1 million for a movie. Joe Mankiewicz directing, writing it. Filming in Rome, leading men, Rex Harrison and Stephen Boyd. Suddenly there's a news coming out that Boyd's leaving, wonderful Welsh actor named Richard Burton's taking over. Richard Burton had had a pretty good career at the time. He did Camelot on Broadway, made some movies. Not big stuff, but, you know, formidable. Suddenly, and there was no E! Channel in those days, but we had the Post and the Mirror and the news, and word was coming back that there was fireworks on the set at Cleopatra. Richard was married to a wonderful Welsh woman named Sybil Burton, who had been through many of his relationships, and Richard always came back to her. Elizabeth inexplicably was married to Eddie Fisher at the time. And so there you go. They're having it. They're going at it. Word comes back that they're leaving their respective mates. Richard's leaving Sybil, and Elizabeth understandably is leaving Eddie Fisher. They close the shooting in Rome. Richard's scheduled to make a movie in Mexico, Night of the Iguana, of all things. They're there, and the paparazzi has descended on this little Mexican hamlet that you would have thought the world was coming to an end every night on the news. At which point, Alex Cohn, the producer I'm working with, says to me, we're doing Hamlet. Richard Burton starring, John Gielgud's directing, and you're handling the press. The press, the mob squad. Look at them down in Mexico. What's going to happen in New York? Well, it's decided that we will rehearse Hamlet in Toronto to relieve us of the craziness of the media. I arrive in Toronto to go to the King Edward Hotel, and there are about 300 people picketing the hotel, the Legion of Decency, because in 62, I think it was, or 63, men and women who were not married did not live together. That was known as a shanda, or not nice, depending on your ethnic background. And they had the whole 9th floor. I had a room on the 8th floor. Alex says to me, we're having lunch with them, with Rich and Elizabeth and Sir John, but we have to wait till they clear out the dining room because it's madness down there. The people are all over the place trying to get a glimpse of Richard and Elizabeth. I arrived to the empty dining room through the maze of press, and there they are. I'm having lunch with Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, Sir John Gielgud, and Alex Cohen. There's something wrong with this picture. They turn to me and they say, what are we doing with the press? I said, Richard, the whole world wants to talk to you. That's the list of requests. I'm recommending the following. I called Tom Prideaux at Life magazine. I said, we're opening Hamlet in April, the month of Shakespeare's 400th birthday, the perfect cover, Richard Burton and Hamlet. He said, let's go for it. Richard said, that's fine with me. We'll take the pictures after a performance one night. That was settled. I said, second thing, Sunday New York Times piece. He said, right. I said, everything else I'll talk with, you can decide. I'll meet with John Springer, your personal press person, and the show sold out everywhere forever. It doesn't matter. Just do what you want. He says, great, great. What did he call everybody? Love. Great love. And he turns to Alex and Sir John and said, well, now let's discuss the schedule and the cast. Who's playing what? So they start talking. And Elizabeth Taylor turns to moi and says, oh, they don't need us for this, honey. Why don't we go sit over there? Oh, okay. So I moved to a table. I'm having lunch with Elizabeth Taylor. I couldn't notice that she was very pretty. Eyes that you've heard about, just gorgeous. The startling thing was she wanted to know all about me. She wasn't being a star. She said, I remember the first thing she said, you seem so young. How did you get this job? Where are you from? What's your background? So I'm an expert on one subject, me. So I'm telling her away and she's laughing and we're chatting. And she says to me, you know, all of this is new for Richard. He was always able to go out bar hop after a show. I grew up with the paparazzi. I can't go out. I make my friends where I'm working. Are you going to be around much during the rehearsal period and the previews? And I said, I'll be back and forth. And she said, can we hang out? Oh, okay. You know, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. She was wonderful. She's smart, she's caring, all of the good things that you want to know about a person, and very pretty. But the crowds and the paparazzi were terrifying. I was her date opening night in Toronto. She and Richard had eloped during the rehearsal period to Montreal. We had a party in the green room for them. I was at Elizabeth and Richard's wedding party. And she asked me to be her date opening night. So we're together and we go back in for the second act. And there was a long, we were on the aisle seats with a long split between the row front of us. The second act curtain was held up about 35, 40 minutes because the bejeweled opening night audience all wanted to get a glimpse of Elizabeth. And they came down and stared at her and made comments about her hair, her dress. I was horrified. I turned to her, I said, are you gonna be okay? You see this arm with the liver spots? You see this arm? That's the arm that Elizabeth Taylor's nails dug into. And I said, are you gonna be okay? She said, I'm gonna be fine. And she went away. She had learned how to withdraw from all of that. And it was a survival mechanism. You know, years later, I saw a documentary with Marilyn Monroe coming out into a crowd, and I looked at the terror on her face, and I said, Marilyn never learned how to survive the way Elizabeth did. That's why Elizabeth could have the long, rich, varied life that she did. Marilyn was overwhelmed by it. It frightened me when I saw it. And I was concerned for Elizabeth. In part two, the next show, the next city after Toronto was Boston. I'm the advance man. On that Sunday, a chartered plane coming in from Toronto with the whole cast. And I have all the information about what hotels everybody's going to be staying at, vans they get into, which we had different cars for the cast. I arrive at the airport, at Logan. I didn't realize that the Boston radio station was announcing all day that Richard and Elizabeth would be arriving, and 10,000 Bostonians arrived at the airport before I did. So when I get to the airport, there's all these cops, Boston's finest, with their arms out, stretched. I, who I'm 28, looking 16, I was shaving only once a week. I have all the material for about where everybody should go. And I say, excuse me to the cops, I have to get through. Yeah, where are you going, kid? And I said, well, I have to get through to the, you're not going anywhere. And I said, no, I really have to. And I started to move and I got rabbit punched in the stomach. And when I woke up, I was in the first aid room. I learned that the plane was pulled into a hangar because no one knew where to go because the advance man couldn't be found. I said to it, one of the nurses looked, I showed her all this material. And she said, oh, he really is the advance man. They got me a scooter and they raced me out to the hangar. The cast was screaming at me until they learned my story that I was a Purple Heart veteran. They had all been witnesses to these nightmares of crowds around Richard and Elizabeth. Suddenly everybody was hugging me and comforting me. I got into the car with Richard and Elizabeth. They were the car, the limo, and they were going to the Ritz. If you know your theater history, when Elizabeth got out of the car, crowd there, and some people tried to pull hair out of her head, and she was thrown up against the limo, and I think that's when her back problems began. It was horrible. It was a nightmare. And then, and we got through it. She got through everything. And the next stop was New York. Opening night was a treat for me. I spent the day with the bomb squad at the Rainbow Room at the top of the RCA building because they were being threatened to be killed. And I said, this isn't the theater that I want. And I didn't blame anybody. I had to get away from all of that. It was a nightmare. But working and knowing Elizabeth was a treat for a 6-month period. You know, when the Fortune Society began, people said to me, call her, maybe she'll do an event. I said, she's not going to remember me. She's remembering Joan Fontaine. I said, Elizabeth is pulled hither and yon. But years later, when my book, I have a memoir. When my book came out, I was interviewed. That's what is known as a soft sell. When my book came out, I was interviewed by this man who said that when he interviewed Elizabeth when she was in the Little Foxes, he had told her that Tennessee Williams had given him a list of people that he should get to know working in the theater. And the list included Julie Harris and Elizabeth Taylor and a press agent named David Rothenberg. And when he told Elizabeth that Tennessee Williams had said that, she said, who else is on the list? And he said, and a press agent named David Rothenberg. And apparently she, as reported to me, said, oh, of course, David Rothenberg. Yes, of course, David. He would release the chains. He would free the chains from your soul. And I said, oh my. Elizabeth said that. And you know, when the AIDS crisis began, she became Dr. Matilda Grimm's partner and became the voice of AMFAR. She was an extraordinary woman and put herself out there. So I was very lucky to have had her. Now, having told you about these wonderful people, I don't want you to think that every star you work for is a joyous experience. How do I tell you about this one woman? Well, let me say this. I've had a lot of experiences in my life. In the early 50s, I was in sit-ins at the People's Drugstore in Washington, and people spit at me and called me nasty names. And I think I came away from that stronger. In 1971, I was in the yard at Attica at the request of inmates, an observer during one of the most horrendous prison uprisings in American history. And from that experience, I think I gained wisdom and strength. In the mid-'80s, Ramsey Clark asked me to be part of a team to go to Nicaragua during the war to see how the Sandinistas were imprisoning the Contras. And I spent a day with the peasant militia at the border and was fired upon and fled into trenches. And I came away from that stronger. And I spent a year on Broadway working with Lauren Bacall. I don't know if I got over that one. It's not that she was difficult, and she was. It's that she made it tough for everybody to do their job. The show was called Waiting in the Wings. And I remember one of the electricians said to me, God, she talks to me like I'm a servant. I said, she must like you. She talks to me like I'm a serf. She had on her dressing room door, no one permitted 90 minutes before curtain. No one wanted to ever go in. She didn't have to put the sign on, especially since on the other side of the theater was her co-star, the glorious and luminous Rosemary Harris, who, when you would walk by her dressing room, would say, oh, love, come in. Would you care for a glass of wine? And you would love being with her. But there was one, you always look for the bright side of things. And some of the legends from Hollywood came to the theater to see Bacall. And I always wanted to see who they were. And one day they said, Fay Ray's at the matinee today and wants to go backstage. Fay Ray, King Kong's leading lady? I want to meet her. 92-year-old Fay Ray. I go down to the aisle. Miss Ray, yes, I'm David Rothenberg. I'll take you backstage. What did you say your name was? I thought because she was 92, she was automatic. I said, David Rothenberg. She said, I can hear you. My name is Fay Rothenberg. I said, oh my God, I could have been King Kong's brother-in-law. So I take her backstage. They take all the pictures, her and Bacall. Finally, she says, enough. Let's get a picture of the Rothenbergs. That's me and Fay Ray. And she said to me, as we were leaving, I did all my own screaming. Every time I watch King Kong now, I say, ain't nobody dubbing that voice. That's Fay Rothenberg, if you will, to drop a name. The other great disappointment, I guess I'd call it a disappointment. I was working at Michael's Pub, and Gil Wiest, the mercurial entrepreneur there, said, Mel Torme's coming in for 6 weeks. Now, my idea of a great individualistic, stylistic singer was Mel Torme, and I thought, what a treat, great singer. First, we meet, I take him to CBS, he's on the guest on the morning show, CBS morning show. We've just met before him, discussing drugs in America. He turns to me and he says, I have a solution for the drug problem. I figure, jazz singer, he's been around the block. Yeah, Mel, what is it? Kill him. I'm waiting for the punchline. I think he's joking. He says, you know why we don't? No, why? Worst 4 letters in the English language. And they are ACLU. And I think, what a wonderful 6 weeks we're going to have working together, me and Mel. I learned something from this, though. Here's what I learned. I had always played him on my radio program on VA. I was a Mel Torme fan. I couldn't play music for several months because I had such a bad taste. He told me about his gun collection. But then I started remembering the people that I knew in the theater who didn't work because they were blacklisted. Particularly I'm not dropping a name, Jack Guilford had become a dear friend of mine and an important person in my life, as well as his wife, Madeline Lee Guilford. And they told me that Jack couldn't work in television and movies for a decade. And he wasn't a particularly political person. He had signed a few petitions against lynching. He wasn't a political person, a nice, decent man who didn't think people should be lynched. And as a result, didn't work for 10 years. So I thought, if I can be upset about that, then I have to separate the art from the politics and play Mel Torme. And that still sticks with me. Roseanne Barr made a stupid comment. Should she not be allowed to be on television? Cosby was terrible what he did. Do we cancel the reruns on Cosby? These are tough things to figure out, separating the artists. Because when Kathy Griffin couldn't work because she held up that picture of Trump. It's a tough thing to work out. Anyway, Lauren Bacall and Mel Torme were not the highlights of my life. What were the highlights of my life, and I learned early in the business that you can work with certain stars who have such an influence over the company and make everything such a joyous experience because of the people who they are. It happened when I worked with John Leguizamo and with Valerie Harper, with Eli Wallach and Ann Jackson. But the first two people that I was aware of this were titans in the theater. One was Julie Harris and the other was Sir John Gielgud. Julie Harris, I worked with her first in Shot in the Dark, which was so many years ago. It was so long ago, William Shatner was still thin. He was in it along with, and Walter Matthau. But Julie was so concerned about, was the wardrobe mistress happy? What about the stage manager? Are the ushers happy? Everybody wanted to do their best and everybody wanted to be with Julie. And when I worked years later with her, when Lucifer's Child, she did Is Act Innocent. She always got a Tony nomination. She won a few times, always got nominated. I'll give you a clue about how I feel about Julie. They did she was not a roast, they did a tribute to her at the Players Club, and I was asked if I would be one of the eulogists. What an honor. And everybody, you know, all these stars were getting up talking about Eli and Annie and Maureen Stapleton, all saying wonderful things about Julie. What am I going to say? So I just got up and I said, you know, working with Julie Harris was like getting the girl who you never thought would say yes, agree to go with you to the junior prom. And that's who she was. The only regret I had is that she had a house in the Cape, and she sent me a note and said, take a week off and spend a week with me. And I couldn't find that week to spend with Julie Harris. John Gielgud, Sir John Gielgud, came to America. I was working with Alex Cohn in School for Scandal. Ralph Richardson, John Gielgud, Sir John was the director and the star. And these Englishmen and English women were all so happy. I said, are English people all this happy? No, it was Sir John. He created a family thing. He was just a good man. What, you know, my grandmother used to say, there's nice and not nice. He was nice. And I worked with him on 3 shows. The School for Scandal, his one-man show, Age is a Man. I was watching it every night. He said, come watch it in the wings one night. He got a stool for me. I'm watching Sir John in the wings of his theater at the Lyceum. And then there was the Hamlet. He was directing the crazy Hamlet up in Toronto. And by then we were all friends. This was my 3rd show working with Sir John. And Julie knows this, at the first rehearsal, the Actors Equity person comes in and gives you all the rules. They pick your depth, and then the cast reads the play. And then it's a break for lunch. Sir John comes over to me and says, I'm going to try and sound like Sir John. It'll sound more like Jackie Mason, but and I said, I will be here, Sir John. He said, will you do me a big favor? You know, I already had committed myself to dinners with Elizabeth. Sir John wanted to know if I would lunch with him when I was in Toronto. And I said, well, my social schedule is filled. He said, let me explain to you. When I'm directing a show, I must have that hour away from the actors. They are so needy. And if I'm eating alone, they think they're doing me a favor by coming over and talking to me. If we could lunch and talk about anything but Hamlet, I would be eternally grateful. Oh, all right, Sir John, I'll eat with you. So we're having lunch, and he's telling me stories. It was like a master class in English theater. He's telling me stories about Ellen Terry, who was his aunt and one of the great English actresses, even before my time, and Edith Evans and Peggy Ashcroft. He told me 15 stories about Laddie before I realized it was Sir Laurence Olivier. And I thought if I could only have had a tape recorder, I only knew how to work a tape recorder, what wonderful stories he was sharing with me. So the show opens in New York. It's about a week after its opening. I'm back in Alex Cohn's office. One of the women comes running over and says, David, Sir John's on the phone. He wants to talk to you. I said, my luncheon buddy. Why not? I get on the phone. Sir John says, if I do it too much, I wouldn't even understand it myself. He says, dear David, it's my 60th birthday next Tuesday. Some people are coming over to my flat. Would you join us? I said, I'll have to check my social schedule. I was free that night. I said to the people here, I know what this is going to be like. I walked into a room that I was the only person there that had not been on the cover of Life or Time magazine. The first thing, he grabs me, there we come, say hello to Lillian and Dorothy. It was the Gish sisters from Silent Screen Days. Before my time, Sir John, but I knew of them, the Gish sisters. My sister said, the point of arrogance for me, I said, I was so relieved when Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy arrived that I had some friends to talk to. And my sister said, do you know how that sounds? How arrogant? Well, I said, well, Hume was in the play. He was Polonius. He was married to Jessie. They were around all the time. She had not yet done Driving Miss Daisy, but she had been the original Blanche in Streetcar. But she was, when I met her, she was Hume's wife. And they came, and that's who I palled around with. So those are my, wasn't I lucky to have Sir John and Julie Harris to work with? Now, I keep mentioning Alexander Cohn, and that really tipped the scale for me. Alexander H. Cohn, was one of the great producers and one of the great showmen in the American theater. I was working at the Bucks County Playhouse in the summer of, I think it was 07 or something, in the early 60s. And Mike Ellis, the producer there, said, you really ought to meet Alex Cohn. He's looking around. What it was determined, Alex was a very prolific producer, had 4 or 5 shows a year. And press agents were mostly freelancers and had their own office. And Alex wanted somebody exclusively in his office, just doing his shows. And his wife, Hildy, said, you're not going to get one of the established people. You have to find somebody up and coming, find one of the bright young kids. And Alex apparently was interviewing everybody under 30 who was still wet behind the ears. And so I was ushered in. And about 5 minutes into the interview, he said to me, I want to hire you to handle all my shows. And he told me 30 years later that I said one thing to him, and he said, that's who I want. And wasn't I lucky? And he always said that he was lucky because it was a great working relationship. It also, I knew my life was going to be different. I'm there 3 months, I get a phone call from him. Hildy's sick. Do you have his wife, Hildy Cohn, the actress, do you have a passport and a toothbrush? Yeah. Meet me at Idlewild. Later became Kennedy Airport. We're going to Rome. I'd never been to Rome, or Jersey and New York. I went to camp in Maine. That was it. We fly to Rome, up to Torino to see a musical called Rugantino, an Italian musical that he wants to bring into New York, which he did. And Aldo Fabrizi, the great Italian character actor, who people know from Open City, was in it. Nino Manfredi played the title role, later became a great Italian movie star. Alex brought it in with sottotitolo, subtitles, which were over, and introduced that to the Broadway theater, which is many shows have used it since. But he, a year later on vacation, I went to Rome, and Pietro Garane and Alessandro Rosa, Pietro Garane and whatever their name, the 2 Italian men, they had written Arrivederci Rome, and they ran the Teatro Sistina, and they were the Rugantino people. And they wined and dined me in Rome, and what a way to see Rome. We're having lunch, Marcello's coming up. It was one of those situations. And Alex introduced me to these folks. Then he, one day he says, we're going to London, Flanders and Swan are opening a new show. Okay. And I had a suite at the Savoy. Big deal. Binky Beaumont, who was H.M. Tennant, the great London producer, comes to me at the intermission and says, here's another one with the nasal voice. I'm having a few people over for pheasant under a glass after the show. I thought he said peasant under a glass, and I was rather offended that a food was named after struggling people. But in fact, it was pheasant under a glass, the only time I ever had it, and the only time I ever had dinner with Ingrid Bergman, because that's who was there. Binky. I had trouble calling him, hello, Binky. Binky. Sir John Gielgud was there, a writer named Joyce Carey, Alex Cohn, Ingrid Bergman, and her teenage daughter, the critic, whatever her name was, famous Fleeting. I couldn't stop staring at Ingrid. I mean, Casablanca, you know, Gaslight. What beauty. So being with Alex was always an experience. During School for Scandal, there were always parties. One time after a Sunday matinee, some restaurant, somebody was hosting a big party. And I'm told we have tables for 4, every buffet, and then you sit with 4 people. Pia Lindstrom, thank you. Thank you, Pia Lindstrom. The crawl works, or whatever that, the chat works. I'm sitting at this table with 3 women, Judy Garland, Vivian Lee, and Dame Margot Fontaine. And it sounds exciting. 3 of the most exciting women, they had all lost it. Judy was bombed. First of all, they all ignored each other. I was the new one in their lives, and they were all over me, 28 and cute. And Judy was a little bombed. Then there was a little more Blanche than Scarlett O'Hara going on that night. And Dame Margot was so imperious, she was on point during the dinner. And other than telling people that about the experience, it was horrible. I mean, telling you tonight that I had dinner with Judy Garland, Vivian Lee, and Dame Margot Fontaine, that's the epitome of name dropping. It was terrible. I didn't like it. Now, the highlight, with Alex, it was always something. School for Scandal goes to Washington. So John Gielgud, Ralph Richardson, the beautiful Geraldine McEwen made her debut. Oh, what a glorious actress she was. And Alex says, the Kennedys are coming. John Fitzgerald and Jacqueline. Wonderful. He says to me, get the vice president and the Supreme Court justice to go. I said, how do I do that? He said, you ask them. Well, I don't know how I got it, but I start calling people. I make the first phone call. A woman answers, hi, this is David Rothenberg, School for Scandals coming to Washington. The Kennedys, President Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy are coming, and we'd like to invite the Vice President and Mrs. Johnson. And the woman says, this is Lady Bird. I said, oh, Mrs. Johnson. She said, darling, we'd love to come. Send me all the information. We'll be there. And they were. So the next phone call, the home of the Supreme Court Justice, I dial away, a woman answers, David Rothenberg, School for Scandal, the Kennedys are coming, the Johnsons are coming, with the Supreme Court Justice, Earl Warren and his wife. This is Ms. Warren. Oh, Mrs. Warren, would you and the judge? Well, I'm certainly gonna come. I don't know about him. He's over at the Supreme Court. I'm gonna call him now and see how it, well, don't interrupt the Supreme Court to invite him to our show. They're not doing anything, darling. I'll call them. And so she calls over and she says, yes, we'll be there. And they were. It's opening night. The Kennedys, the Johnsons, the Warrens, you know, your usual crowd. Alex says to me, Harold Wilson's here, the head of the Labor Party. He's rumored to be the next prime minister. He's sitting over there with David Ormsby Gore, the ambassador to England. Get them to come backstage. I said, how? He said, you ask them. I walk over to Mr. Wilson. Fortunately, he was Labor and not Tory. Hey, bud, what's up? I said, Mr. Cohen's bringing the president backstage. Can I bring you back? Sure, bloke. So the curtain falls. The cast is arranged on stage. Alex Cohen walks down one aisle with President and Mrs. Kennedy. I walk down the other aisle with Harold Wilson and David Ormsby Gore. We come to the middle of the stage and I say, Mr. President and Alexander Cohen, I'd like you to meet Harold Wilson from England. Alex says, Mr. President, I'd like you to meet David Rothenberg and Harold Wilson. And everybody shakes hands. The next day, Harold Wilson is in the White House meeting the president, and the Washington Post reports that Harold Wilson met the president for the first time in the White House yesterday. But there should be a little historic asterisk there that says, Harold Wilson met Jack Kennedy the night before, and I introduced them. One of the things I failed to tell you is that when I went to work with Alex, I forgot, how did I forget this? When I went to work with Alex, the first show that we did was Beyond the Fringe. I didn't know that, talk about English people and happy, I didn't know that a show was going to run for 4 years or 3 years. Here's me. These are the Fringe. Can you see that picture? That's me, Alan Bennett, Jonathan Miller, Dudley Moore, who knew that Dudley was going to be a movie star, and Peter Cook. We're in Washington. We were all the same age. They were new to America, and I was their guide. We had a terrific time together. So all in all, how lucky I was that as a kid, Alex Cohn plucked me out. And I said that in the middle of the first interview that I said something that, and 30 years later, he told me that's why he made it gamble. And I said, what was it that I said, Alex? And he said, when I was interviewing you, I said, you've only been in the business for 2 years. I'm working on all these big shows. You probably don't know everybody, more experienced people. It's a business where everybody knows everyone. Why would I hire you with so limited experience? And apparently, this precocious little person said to him, well, if I don't know someone and I have a good idea, maybe that will serve as an introduction. And he bought that, and he was right. And I was lucky. Another part of the theater is that you make friends, and they become friends for life. Linda Lavin I met when she was in the chorus of an off-Broadway musical called OK, before she became Alice on television. And to this day, when she called me a couple of weeks ago, she said, you know, it's the one phone number I can always remember. And I said, maybe because you've been calling it so often for so many years. And she's a dear friend, as is Joy Behar, as was Dorothy Loudon, who won a Tony for Annie and also won my heart. My first friend in the theater, though, the first summer I was working for a press agent for Max Eisen just for the summer on 6 musical touring shows that were going into the 10th musicals. And one of the shows was Jamaica. Lena Horne did it on Broadway, and Abbey Lincoln was going to be doing it in the tour. And Max said to me, go over, we're taking some pictures of Abbey Lincoln. Some kid in the chorus is directing it. Go meet him and help him with the pictures. So I walk over to David Workman's photo studio, and there is this intimidating looking man standing very stern, what I call a dancer's carriage. And I said to him, hi, are you the director? I'm David Rothenberg from Mike Eisen's office. And he said, hi, my name is Alvin Ailey. And the whole demeanor changed. Suddenly, that austerity and that carriage, he was just a guy. So we were taking pictures of Abbey Lincoln, and I saw he was being so creative and so funny, and we were laughing together. And we went, he said, let's get a bite to eat when the photo thing was done. And we went out and we had lunch together, and he was in a chorus. I was an apprentice press agent. And we talked about that first time we met about what we wanted in the theater, what our dreams were. We were just 2 kids talking. And we immediately liked each other, and we found ourselves, and it happens in the theater. You meet somebody and the humor quotient is right there. And we were laughing at everything. We exchanged phone numbers. And if I was working on a show, I would call Alvin. I remember he called and said, I'm going to a dance concert with a couple of friends. You want to come with me? I know nothing about dance. And there I am with Alvin and Arthur Mitchell, who became the first African-American soloist in the New York City Ballet and started the Dance Theater of Harlem, and a man named Nat Horne. What I remember is we went out after I don't remember the concert, we went out for coffee afterwards, and the passion they had about dance, talking, I thought these men are serious, and they were talking about dance in a way that I never understood, I had never thought of before. they were really creative people. Anyway, Alvin and I, we would go to shows together. We would, you know, he'd do something and he'd invite me likewise. One day I run into him. It's the summer of '60, I think. I can't be sure of the year. It was a few years ago. In front of Howard Johnson's 46th Street and Broadway, Alvin Ailey says to David Rothenberg, "What are you doing this afternoon?" About 2:30. Now, when somebody in the, Julie would know this, when somebody in the business says, "What are you doing?" it means they're trying something out. And you think, "Oh God, I love you, Alvin, but what if it's terrible? What do I say? Do I have to go?" You start making up the lies. For those of you who haven't worked in the theater, let me tell you the civilian equivalent. Have you ever seen a friend with a baby carriage and it's the new baby and you look in and say, "Oh, what a very ugly child. What a big baby. He looks just like his grandfather." And you find out it's a girl and you don't know what to say or do. Well, in the theater, when somebody says, "What are you doing?" it's a clue. 46th Street and Broadway on a hot August day, Alvin Ailey says apologetically to David Rothenberg, "I've started a dance company and I'm having a rehearsal this afternoon at Variety Arts over the Howard Johnsons. Would you come?" I couldn't think of a lie fast enough, so I show up. I'm the only person that shows up. August, no air conditioning in Variety Arts. The dancers have been rehearsing all day in their sweaty, torn leotards. It smells like a gym. Alvin says to me, "I'm creating a piece from the Bible." Well, I figured, well, that's the final nail in the coffin. I don't know anything about dance, and he's going to have something from the Bible. He's calling it Revelations. Have you ever seen the Ailey Company's Revelations? Well, I saw it in a room with no air conditioning, with torn leotards in the middle of the summer, and I knew I was witness to genius because it was all there, right there in that gym. Alvin came to me afterwards. I only remember the end. "What did you think?" I said, "Alvin, it's brilliant." He said, "You didn't like it." I said, "It's wonderful. What's wrong with it?" "It's not so bad." "Oh, thank God." Alvin, before the Ailey Company made it big, he kicked around. He was in all sorts of plays and shows. One was called "Call Me by My Rightful Name." I went down to see him in it, fell in love with the leading lady. There was a young actor named Robert Duvall in it and a young woman. And I went backstage and I said, "Joe, Alvin, she's wonderful." He said, "I'm glad you liked her. I've told her I have a friend coming. We're all going out." And that's when I met Joan Hackett. And Alvin, Joan, and I, we closed every joint in town that night. And we had such a wonderful time. And we were like Jules and Jim for the next year. We were everywhere together, laughter. I have a picture of, you know, Joan went on to Hollywood. Her last picture, she got an Oscar nomination before. That's me and Joan. Can you see us at an opening? Wasn't she lovely? I think that's Alex Cohn on that side and Mickey Alpert on that side. And, you know, Alvin became a great, the company became a great success. They were in Russia, and the New York Times wrote a piece saying, "Triumph of the Moscow season was the American Ailey Dance Company." And Richard Barr brought him back to New York, put him on Broadway, and I was the first Broadway press agent for Alvin's company, the only time we really worked together. But when the Fortune Society began years later, and we thought we should have an advisory council of prominent people, the first two people I asked and who said yes immediately were Alvin Ailey and Joan Hackett. And they have been, both of them left the planet too early, and but I have the memories of them. And I'll just tell you one thing. One of the things Alvin did was that when the company was playing at City Center, whenever it wasn't sold out, 10 tickets to the Fortune Society. That was a given. And at every performance, I would bring 10 men and women who had come out of prison. And the running gag, Kenny Jackson used to say, when you get out of prison in New York, you get $40, a bologna sandwich, and 2 tickets to Alvin Ailey. The theater and the Fortune Society blending together. A lot of theater people did wonderful things for us. Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee did an evening. So did Eli Wallach and Ann Jackson. Mike Farrell from MASH came to New York. He was visiting Fortune. Everybody said, David, the guy from MASH is here. And I had never seen MASH, and I met Mike, and he said, God, this is exciting stuff. And we talked, and he said, would you have dinner with me tonight? And I said, Mike, I'd love to, except tonight I'm supposed to debate the district attorney in Nassau County on the death penalty. He said, could I come with you? I said, that's what you want to do in your one night in New York? He said, that's exactly what I'd like to do. So Mike Farrell joined me, and I went to Hempstead to this auditorium with about 5 people. And as I walked in, they all stood and applauded Mike Farrell. It was like Joe Cutner walking down the hall in the 7th grade. I won the debate before I said anything because I was with somebody whose name could be dropped, the guy from MASH. There was one other person who had a big impact on us. I had taken Kenny Jackson and Mel Rivers to the Mike Douglas show down in Philly, and we were in the green room. I was in the green room. They were on camera, and the next guest sitting next to me was an actor named George C. Scott, Oscar winner for Patton. And he's watching intently, and he says, you with these guys? And I said, yeah. He said, they are terrific. And I said, yes, they are. He said, you know, there, but for the grace of God, go I. I was one of those kids that could have gone either way. And I said, really? He said, do you have a card? I said, we're not there yet. He said, but can you give me your address? And I did. And about 2 weeks later, I got a letter from a lawyer saying Mike, that George C. Scott had turned over an oil well to the Fortune Society. And for the next 10 years, our rent was paid by the dividends from that oil well. And a few years later, I called George and I said, we're having an event, we want to honor you. And he said, oh, David, that's not my thing. I said, but we want to honor you. He said, okay, I'll come if that helps Fortune, but don't tell them about the oil well. So George came and we honored him, and everybody said, oh, he's such a tough guy. He's such a difficult man. No, he's not. No, he's not. He had a heart of gold. And I kept it secret, never told anybody about the oil well, but he's left the planet, so nobody's going to bother you, George. And it's a way for me to say thank you for that. Now, to finish this up, at last, you might be saying, I said at the beginning that a friend of mine said, why don't you bored us with these stories all these years? And here's the hit parade of stories that people would always say, tell us about that one. One was that I learned that the most important man in theater was the maitre d' at Sardi's, because he determined where you sat. And if you think name dropping is a big thing, where you sit at Sardi's is important. And I learned this because new in the business, working for Alex, still a kid, I make an appointment or a reservation for 3 for lunch at 1 o'clock. I arrive early. They usher me upstairs to what I learned was social Siberia, a few people there, and I'm sitting there waiting for the star of my show and the reporter. Suddenly, the maitre d' is rushing up the steps. You must always tell us who you're bringing. You must always tell us. Schlepping up behind them is Charles Boyer, the star of my show. And Charles is saying, oh, this is very nice. I've never been up here. And the maitre d' is saying, no, Charles, you must sit downstairs. And Charles is saying, no, this is much better for an interview. It's so quiet. So we have the interview there with Charles and the reporter. Afterwards, the maitre d', Jimmy at Sardi's, says to me, you must always tell us who you're bringing. And maybe because I was young and arrogant, I said, I can only know that when I make a reservation, I can only guarantee that I will show up. And for the next 15 years, the cushion table in the corner was always mine. And some of the biggest stars in the business sat there with me. but no one loved that table more than my Aunt Lillian, who would come in and join me and want to see who everyone was. The thing about Sardi's, the most important table was the A table, the big round table just as you came in. I don't know why, because in the winter, people would open the door, the wind would come in, you freeze your galyachis off as the gusts of wind, but everyone could see you sitting there. I only sat at the A table once, and I'll tell you why when I give you the cast sitting at the table with me. Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Warren Beatty, Natalie Wood, Lawrence Harvey, and Siobhan McKenna. I don't know how she got there. I do know that anyone who had ever met me for 4 seconds came over to say hello and sat down and kneeled at my thigh to say hello to me and look around at Elizabeth and Richard, hoping to be introduced. I didn't tell you about Richard when I was talking about Elizabeth. He called everybody love. He never remembered your name. He never remembered anyone's name. Love, 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 love. But Richard was the most charismatic male I ever worked with in the theater. I don't think the movies ever got what Richard has. In the theater, they did, because there was a power, there was almost a seductive power, both men and women. I'm not talking sexually, I'm talking about you wanted to be with him because of his strength. The only other person I ever met who had that kind of impact on me, the way Richard Burton did, was when I got very political. Maureen of the evidence, and all sorts of prominent people were invited. One day, he said, come up, a few people are going to, I was a state committee man in the Democratic Party at the time, and the governor of Arkansas was there, and that's the night I met William Clinton. And when Bill Clinton went around the room and talked to you and looked at you, you felt that you were the center of his universe. The answers to the questions he asked, you thought were the most important things he's ever heard. And I thought Richard Burton could have been a great politician and William Clinton could have been a great actor, but they were both charismatic. And they were all these people I mentioned are some of the names that I have dropped. Now, I don't want you to think that I've exhausted it. If I ever did name dropping too, like Joe McCarthy, I have in my hand 250 names. There are some people I'm not going to tell you their stories, but people about, if you run into me, I have stories about Jackie Robinson, Margaret Rutherford, Ethel Merman, Christopher Reeve, and Bella Abzug. I put them together because they co-hosted a fundraising party for the Fortune Society. We billed Superman and Superwoman. Charles Colson and Jeb Magruder, two of the Watergate defendants, both came to the Fortune Society when they got out of prison. Magruder really wanted help. Charles Colson was a snake salesman selling. Magruder was quite a man. Maria Tallchief, Richie Pryor, Dr. Carl Menon, Christine Crawford, Diane Keaton, Mort Saul, Mark Connolly, Larry Hagman. You remember him, Ewing, from when I was in Bucks County, Larry was a kid. We hung out together. Eleanor Roosevelt and Sylvia Miles. I like putting them together. Jerry Orbach, Edward Albee. Oh, let me just tell you the Edward Albee story, and then I'll get over with this. I worked with Edward on many shows. I ran into him on the subway one day, and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, to the castle, Thursday night community meetings. He said, "Oh God, I'm going to a reading of a play. I'd rather come with you." I said, "You're always welcome." 2 weeks later, he called me. He said, "Can I come to the castle?" "Sure, Edward." It was the night that a woman running for district attorney, her name shall be spared, and before the meeting, there was a focus group. About 6 of us would sit with her and answer questions to this woman running for district attorney, and Edward Albee is sitting with me. He says to me, "Can I ask a question?" I said, "Of course, Edward." He asks her a question and she dismisses him rudely. And as we're walking out of the meeting, she said to me, "Who's that old con? What did he do?" I said, "He won 3 Pulitzer Prizes. I know that." "Who is he?" I told her, "Edward Albee." Good story. Anyway, Jim Brown, the football player, Odetta, oh, my heart. Ed Koch, there's a tale and a half. Dustin Hoffman, Andy Warhol, Al Pacino, Sal Mineo, Vladimir Horowitz, all people who I had a moment with. Nathan Leopold from Loeb and Leopold. I met him. Valerie Salinas, she shot Andy Warhol. Roy Cohn. Oh. Anyway, those are some of the people that are not in name dropping, but if I ever did a second one, which I won't, could be included. But there are other people whose names you may not know that shaped my life. In the early days of Fortune, Kenny Jackson, Mel Rivers, Fran O'Leary, Charlie McGregor, Chuck Bragansky, Rodney Taylor, Bobby Davis, Jeanette Spencer, Pam Greenspan. And in more recent years, Stanley Richards, Sam Rivera, Barry Campbell, Vilma Ortiz Donovan, Casimir Torres, Victor Rojas, Andrew Burroughs, and Irvin Hunt. These are all people that were very important in my life and shaped my life. And I am so blessed to have had the theater people and the Fortune people. And because of all of them, they are the reason why I'm with you tonight. And for that, I thank all of you. Good night.